The telegraph key clicked beneath Natalie Crawford's fingertips like a familiar song, each tap carrying messages across copper wires to distant places she had never seen. When suddenly the door burst open, and three rough-looking men with drawn pistols stormed into the small office on a sweltering July afternoon in 1878. Natalie's breath caught in her throat, her hand freezing mid-transmission as the tallest man, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat stained with trail dust, aimed his revolver directly at her chest. She had heard stories about bandits targeting telegraph offices to intercept information about bank transfers and gold shipments, but she had never imagined it would happen to her in Leavenworth, Kansas, a bustling town on the Missouri River that had always seemed so safe despite its rough frontier edges. "Step away from that machine, miss," the tall man growled, his voice like gravel scraping against wood. His companions fanned out on either side of him, blocking any escape route. "We know there's been messages coming through about a shipment heading west. You're going to tell us everything you know, or things are going to get real unpleasant for a pretty young lady like yourself." Natalie's mind raced. She was only 22 years old, had been working as a telegraph operator for 3 years, ever since her father taught her Morse code before he passed away from fever. Her mother had died when she was just a child, leaving her with no family except a distant aunt in St. Louis she barely knew. This job was everything to her, her livelihood, her connection to the wider world beyond the Kansas plains. She could not betray the trust placed in her, could not reveal confidential information about the gold shipment heading to Fort Riley that was supposed to remain secret. "I do not know what you are talking about," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice despite the trembling in her hands. "I send and receive general messages, nothing about shipments." The tall man stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath and see the cruel glint in his pale eyes. "Do not play games with me, girl. We have a man on the inside who told us all about it. We just need the timing and the route. Tell us now, and we'll leave you be. Make this difficult and, well, accidents happen." Before Natalie could respond, the door opened again, this time with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violent entrance of the thieves. A tall cowboy with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar stepped inside, his hand resting casually on the holster at his hip. He took in the scene with eyes the color of rich earth, and something shifted in his expression, a hardening that made him suddenly look dangerous despite his calm demeanor. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice deep and measured, "I believe you are in the wrong establishment. The saloon is down the street." The tall thief spun around, his pistol swinging toward the newcomer. "This is none of your concern, cowboy. Walk away while you still can." The cowboy did not move. Natalie noticed the way he stood, balanced and ready like a coiled spring. There was a star pinned to his leather vest, dulled with age and dust, marking him as some kind of lawman, though she could not quite make out the inscription from where she stood. "I am afraid I cannot do that," the cowboy said. "You see, Miss Crawford here is under the protection of the law, and you boys are threatening her. That makes it very much my concern." Natalie's heart hammered against her ribs. She recognized him now, or at least knew of him. Kieran Irons, a deputy marshal who had arrived in Leavenworth about 6 months ago, brought in to help control the increasing lawlessness that came with the town's growth as a major supply point for westward expansion. She had seen him around town, had even sent a few telegrams on his behalf to other law offices, but they had never really spoken beyond professional courtesies. The tension in the room stretched tight as a bowstring. The three thieves exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. They outnumbered him, But there was something about Kieran Irons that gave them pause, a quiet confidence that suggested he was not a man to be underestimated. "Last chance, Marshal," the tall thief said. "There's 3 of us and one of you. Walk away." Kieran's hand moved so fast Natalie almost missed it. One moment it was resting on his holster, the next his revolver was drawn and leveled at the tall thief's chest. "I have been in worse odds," he said quietly, "but I would prefer not to have a shootout in Miss Crawford's office. It would be messy, and she has equipment in here that the town relies on. So here is what is going to happen. You 3 are going to put your weapons on the floor, nice and slow, and then you are going to walk out that door with your hands up. I will be right behind you, and we will take a walk over to the jail." The thieves hesitated. Natalie could see the calculations running through their minds, the weighing of risk and reward. The shorter man on the left, with a scar running down his cheek, looked particularly agitated, his finger twitching near the trigger of his gun. "Do not," Kieran said, his voice sharp as a blade, his eyes fixed on the scarred man. "You will not even clear leather before I put a bullet in you. And your friends here will not fare much better. Use your head." For a long moment, nobody moved. Natalie held her breath, pressed back against the wall behind her desk, her telegraph key forgotten. Then, slowly, the tall thief lowered his weapon. "We will remember this, Marshal," he said as he placed his pistol on the floor. "I am counting on it," Kieran replied. "Means you will think twice before trying something this stupid again." The other 2 men followed suit, though the scarred one did so with obvious reluctance. Kieran moved with practiced efficiency, keeping his weapon trained on them as he kicked their guns away, sending them sliding across the wooden floor toward Natalie. She bent quickly and gathered them up, her hands steadier now that the immediate danger seemed to be passing. "Outside," Kieran ordered. "Hands where I can see them." The 3 men filed out and Kieran followed, pausing briefly at the door. He looked back at Natalie, and something in his expression softened. "Lock this door behind me, Miss Crawford. Do not open it for anyone except me or Sheriff Dawson. I will be back once I have these 3 secured." Natalie nodded, unable to find her voice. As soon as the door closed, she rushed forward and threw the bolt, then leaned against the solid wood, her legs suddenly weak. Her whole body began to shake, the delayed reaction to the terror she had just experienced flooding through her. She had come so close to something terrible. If Kieran Irons had not walked in when he did, if he had been even a few minutes later, she did not know what those men might have done to her. She moved back to her desk on unsteady legs and sank into her chair. The telegraph key sat silent now, waiting. She needed to finish the transmission she had been in the middle of when the thieves burst in, but her hands were shaking too badly. Instead, she just sat there, staring at the 3 revolvers on her desk, physical proof that the last 10 minutes had really happened and were not just some nightmare. Time passed in a strange haze. The sunlight streaming through the window shifted angle, and the sounds of the street outside continued as normal, people going about their business unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. Natalie forced herself to take deep breaths, trying to calm her racing heart. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Crawford, it is Kieran Irons. I am back." She recognized his voice and hurried to unbolt the door. He stepped inside, and she noticed details she had missed before in the chaos, the way his dark hair was shot through with just a few threads of silver at the temples, though he could not be much older than 30. The crinkles at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long hours in the sun. The gentle way he removed his hat now that the danger had passed. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentler than it had been with the thieves. Natalie nodded, then shook her head, then felt foolish. "I do not know," she admitted. "That was terrifying." "I imagine it was," Kieran said. He glanced at the revolvers on her desk. "I will need to take those as evidence. Did they hurt you at all?" "Lay hands on you? No," Natalie said quickly. "You arrived before they could do anything except threaten me. How did you know to come?" "I did not," Kieran admitted. He turned his hat in his hands, a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "I was actually coming to send a telegram. Pure luck or providence, depending on your beliefs." "Providence," Natalie whispered. "It must have been. Another minute or two and I do not know what would have happened." Kieran's expression darkened. "Those men are part of a gang that has been operating in the territory. We have been tracking them for months. This is the first time they have been brazen enough to try something in broad daylight in a busy town. I suspect they are getting desperate." "They wanted information about a gold shipment," Natalie said. "They said they had a man on the inside who told them about it." Kieran's attention sharpened. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing," Natalie said firmly. "I would never betray the confidentiality of the messages I handle, even if it meant—" She trailed off, not wanting to finish that sentence. Something in Kieran's expression shifted, a look of respect and something else, something warmer. "That was very brave," he said quietly. "Brave and foolish. Your life is worth more than any gold shipment." "The trust people place in me is worth something too," Natalie countered. "If I cannot be relied upon to keep confidential information secret, then what good am I as a telegraph operator? The whole system depends on trust." Kieran studied her for a long moment, and Natalie found herself unable to look away from his dark eyes. There was an intensity to his gaze that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "I need to ask you some questions," Kieran said finally. "For my report. Would you be willing to come down to the sheriff's office, or would you prefer I ask them here?" "Here, please," Natalie said. The thought of leaving her office, of walking through the streets where those men had been, made her stomach clench with anxiety. "I feel safer here." "All right," Kieran agreed easily. He pulled over the only other chair in the small office and sat down across from her desk. For the next hour, he asked her detailed questions about the incident, writing everything down in a worn leather notebook. His presence was calming, steady. Natalie found herself relaxing as they talked, though she was hyper-aware of every small detail about him, the way his pen scratched across the paper, the slight rasp in his voice that suggested he spent more time outdoors than in, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard work. When he finally closed his notebook, the afternoon light had taken on the golden quality that preceded evening. "I think that is everything I need for now," Kieran said. He hesitated, then added, "Miss Crawford, I want you to know that those men will not be bothering you again. They are locked up tight, and if the judge agrees with the charges we are bringing, they will be going to prison for a very long time." "Thank you," Natalie said. The words felt inadequate for what he had done, for the danger he had put himself in to protect her. "You saved my life today, Marshal Irons." "Kieran," he said. "Just Kieran is fine, and I was only doing my job." "It was more than that," Natalie insisted. "You put yourself between me and 3 armed men. That goes beyond duty." Kieran stood, and for a moment he looked like he wanted to say something more. Instead, he just settled his hat back on his head. "Will you be all right here alone? I can have someone escort you home when you are ready to close up for the day." "I will be fine," Natalie said, though she was not entirely sure that was true. "I have another hour or two of work to finish. Then I will check back before I make my evening rounds," Kieran said, "to make sure you get home safely." After he left, Natalie sat in the quiet office and tried to return to work. Her hand still trembled slightly as she worked the telegraph key, sending the delayed messages that had piled up during the incident. But her mind kept drifting back to Kieran Irons, the way he had stood so calmly in the face of danger, the gentleness in his voice when he spoke to her. the warmth in his eyes that made her feel things she had not felt since her brief courtship with Thomas Harrington 3 years ago, before he had left for the California gold fields and never returned. True to his word, Kieran returned just as Natalie was preparing to close the office for the evening. He walked her home through the dusty streets of Leavenworth, past the bustling saloons and general stores, past the grand homes near the river and the more modest residences further inland. Natalie rented a small room in a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Henley, a kindly woman in her 60s who had taken Natalie under her wing when she first arrived in town 3 years ago. They did not talk much on the walk, but the silence was comfortable rather than awkward. Kieran seemed to understand that she was still processing everything that had happened, still dealing with the aftermath of fear and shock. When they reached the boarding house, he tipped his hat to her. "Get some rest, Miss Crawford," he said. "Tomorrow will be easier." "Natalie," she said impulsively. "If I may call you Kieran, then you should call me Natalie." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his serious features into something almost boyish. "Good night, then, Natalie." "Good night, Kieran." She watched him walk away into the gathering dusk, his tall frame silhouetted against the orange sky, and felt something shift inside her chest, like the first turn of a key in a long, locked door. The next few days passed in a strange blur. The attempted robbery became the talk of the town, and Natalie found herself the subject of much attention and speculation. People stopped by the Telegraph office to see if she was all right, to hear the story firsthand, to exclaim over her bravery and narrow escape. It was exhausting, and Natalie found herself longing for the quiet routine she had known before. The one bright spot was Kieran. He stopped by every day, ostensibly to update her on the case against the thieves, but their conversations always drifted beyond the official business. She learned that he had grown up in Texas, the youngest son of a rancher who had died when Kieran was 16. He had worked cattle drives for years before joining the Texas Rangers, then moved north to Kansas. When he grew tired of the political corruption, he saw infiltrating law enforcement in his home state. "I wanted to do something that mattered," he told her one afternoon, leaning against the doorframe of her office as she transcribed an incoming message. "Something clean and honest. Sometimes I wonder if such a thing exists anymore." "It does," Natalie said firmly, pausing in her work to look at him. "What you did for me, that was honest and good. You risked your life for a stranger." "You are not a stranger," Kieran said quietly. "I had seen you around town, noticed you." Natalie's pulse quickened. "Noticed me." He looked almost embarrassed, a faint color rising in his weathered cheeks. "A man would have to be blind not to notice you, Natalie. You have a way about you, a kind of quiet grace. And I had heard people talk about how good you are at your job, how trustworthy. In a town full of grifters and opportunists, that stands out." She did not know what to say to that. Her own feelings were complicated, tangled up in gratitude and attraction, and the lingering fear from the attack. She found herself looking forward to his visits with an anticipation that felt almost giddy, like she was a schoolgirl again, instead of a grown woman running her own business. 2 weeks after the incident, Kieran arrived at the Telegraph office just as Natalie was closing up for the evening. He held his hat in his hands and looked uncharacteristically nervous. "I was wondering," he said, then paused and seemed to gather himself. "There is a church social tomorrow evening, music and dancing. I would be honored if you would accompany me." Natalie's heart leaped. She had attended church socials before, but always alone or with other women from the boarding house. The thought of going with Kieran, of dancing with him, of being seen together as a couple, filled her with a warm excitement. "I would like that very much," she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. The church social was held in a large barn on the edge of town, decorated with lanterns and wildflowers. A local band played fiddle music while couples spun across the makeshift dance floor. Natalie wore her best dress, a deep blue calico that her aunt had sent her last Christmas, and felt beautiful when she saw the way Kieran looked at her when he arrived to escort her. He cleaned up well, she thought. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he wore a clean white shirt and vest instead of his usual work clothes. Without his gun belt and marshal's star, he looked younger, less severe. When he offered his arm, she took it gladly, and they walked together to the social in the soft evening air. Dancing with Kieran was like nothing Natalie had experienced before. He was a good dancer, confident and sure in his movements, and he held her with a gentle firmness that made her feel safe and cherished at the same time. They swirled across the floor to a waltz, and Natalie found herself laughing with pure joy, the last shadows of fear from the robbery finally lifting from her heart. "You are a wonderful dancer," she said when the music paused between songs. "I am passable," Kieran replied with a self-deprecating smile, "but you make me look good. You are as light as air." They danced several more dances, then stepped outside to cool off in the night breeze. The stars were brilliant overhead, uncountable diamonds scattered across the black velvet of the sky. Natalie had always loved the night sky in Kansas, so much bigger and more expansive than anything she had known in her childhood in Ohio. "Natalie," Kieran said, his voice low and serious. "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, suddenly nervous. "What is it?" "These past 2 weeks spending time with you, talking with you, it has meant more to me than I can properly express," he said. He took her hand in his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know the circumstances of our meeting were terrible, but I cannot help what I feel. You have gotten under my skin in the best possible way." Natalie's breath caught. "I feel the same way," she whispered. "Every time you walk through the door of the Telegraph office, my heart beats faster. When you are gone, I count the hours until you return. I have never felt like this before, not even when I thought I was in love years ago." "Natalie," Kieran breathed her name like a prayer. He raised his free hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palm. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," she said simply. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but she did not want that at all. When his lips met hers, it was sweet and gentle and full of promise. Natalie felt like every nerve in her body came alive at once, like she was experiencing color for the first time after years of seeing in shades of gray. She leaned into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "You have connected straight to my heart," Natalie whispered, the words coming from some deep place inside her that she had not known existed. "Like a telegraph wire running directly from your soul to mine." Kieran smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up his whole face. "That is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever said to me," he murmured. Then he kissed her again, and the world fell away until there was nothing but the two of them under the vast Kansas sky. Over the following months, their courtship deepened and grew. Kieran took her on picnics by the Missouri River, where they would sit on a blanket and talk for hours about everything and nothing. He taught her to shoot, patiently correcting her stance and aim until she could hit a tin can at 20 paces. She taught him Morse code, tapping out messages on his palm that made him laugh. They were not without challenges. There was gossip in town, some of it unkind. A few people suggested that Natalie had manipulated the robbery situation to trap a husband, which was absurd and hurtful. Others whispered that Kieran was too old for her, though at 31 he was less than 10 years her senior. But they weathered the talk together, united in their growing love for each other. The trial of the three thieves came in late September. Natalie had to testify, reliving the terror of that afternoon for the judge and jury. It was harder than she had expected, brought back all the fear she had finally begun to leave behind. But Kieran was there, sitting in the courtroom, his steady presence an anchor. When she looked at him, she found the strength to speak clearly and truthfully about what had happened. The men were found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 15 years in the territorial prison. As they were led away, the tall thief who had threatened her locked eyes with Natalie for a brief moment, and she saw the hatred there. But she also saw defeat, and she knew he could never hurt her again. That evening, Kieran took her to dinner at the nicest restaurant in Leavenworth, a fancy establishment with real tablecloths and imported wine. After they finished their meal, he reached across the table and took her hand. "Natalie Crawford," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "these past months with you have been the happiest of my life. You are smart and brave and beautiful, and I cannot imagine spending another day without you by my side. Would you do me the tremendous honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Natalie's eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band with a small sapphire that matched the blue of her favorite dress. It fit perfectly, and Natalie stared at it in wonder, hardly able to believe this was real, that she was engaged to this incredible man who had burst into her life and changed everything. They were married in November, in a ceremony at the same church where they had first danced together. Mrs. Henley cried happy tears, and Sheriff Dawson served as Kieran's best man. Natalie wore a cream-colored dress that she and Mrs. Henley had spent weeks sewing, with lace from her mother's wedding dress carefully incorporated into the bodice. She felt like a princess from a fairy tale as she walked down the aisle toward Kieran, who looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Their vows were simple but heartfelt. When Kieran promised to love and protect her for the rest of his days, Natalie knew he meant every word. And when she promised to stand by his side through all of life's joys and sorrows, she felt the truth of it deep in her bones. The kiss they shared as husband and wife was tender and full of promise. The small congregation cheered, and Natalie laughed against Kieran's lips, her heart so full she thought it might burst. They rented a small house on the outskirts of town, a cozy place with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that got wonderful morning light. Natalie continued to work at the Telegraph office, and Kieran continued his duties as Deputy Marshal. They fell into an easy rhythm, their lives intertwining like the copper wires that carried messages across the plains. In the evenings, they would sit on their front porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Kieran would tell her stories about his days riding cattle trails, and Natalie would share her dreams of maybe one day owning a chain of telegraph offices, expanding the network of communication across the frontier. "You could do it," Kieran said one evening, his arm around her shoulders as they sat together on the porch swing. "You have the skills and the business sense. I believe in you." "I believe in us," Natalie replied, snuggling closer to his warmth. The November air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke from distant fireplaces. "Whatever we do, we will do it together." Their first winter as a married couple was cold but cozy. They kept the fire burning bright and warm and spent long evenings reading together or playing cards. Kieran proved to be terrible at poker, which made Natalie laugh until her sides hurt. She discovered that he sang in the bath, old cowboy songs that were often off-key, but somehow endearing. In February, Natalie realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She had always wanted children, but the reality of it, the physical changes happening in her body, the knowledge that she would be responsible for another life, was overwhelming. When she told Kieran, he picked her up and spun her around, his face alight with happiness. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, like he could not quite believe it. "We are going to be parents." "Are you ready for this?" Natalie asked, needing his reassurance. "I am ready for anything as long as I have you," Kieran replied, cupping her face in his hands and kissing her gently. "We will figure it out together, just like everything else." The pregnancy was not easy. Natalie suffered from terrible nausea in the first months, and the summer heat made her swollen and uncomfortable. But Kieran was attentive and patient, bringing her cool water and fanning her when she was too hot, rubbing her aching feet at night, accompanying her on slow walks when she needed fresh air. She worked at the Telegraph office until late August, when Mrs. Henley and several other women in town insisted she needed to rest. Natalie was reluctant to leave her post, worried about who would handle the delicate work of transmitting important messages, but Kieran had helped her train a young man named Samuel to take over temporarily. Samuel was eager and careful, and Natalie felt reasonably confident leaving the office in his hands. Their son was born on a golden September afternoon in 1879, a year almost to the day after the trial that had sent Natalie's attackers to prison. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Natalie was certain she could not do it, that the pain would break her. But Kieran stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering encouragement, being her strength when her own failed. When the midwife finally placed the squalling, red-faced baby in her arms, Natalie felt a love so fierce and immediate that it took her breath away. The baby had Kieran's dark hair and her own nose, and he gripped her finger with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "We have been waiting for you." They named him Michael after Kieran's father, Michael Irons, their son, their miracle. Kieran held the baby with a tenderness that made Natalie fall in love with him all over again, watching this strong, tough lawman cradling their tiny child like he was made of spun glass. Parenthood changed them both in ways they had not anticipated. Sleepless nights and endless diaper changes became their new normal. Natalie's world narrowed to the immediate needs of this small person who depended on her completely. But even in the exhaustion and chaos, there was profound joy. Michael's first smile, the way he started to recognize their faces and voices, the small baby sounds that gradually developed into something approaching laughter, every milestone was a celebration. When Michael was 6 months old, Natalie returned to work part-time with Mrs. Henley watching the baby during her shifts. It was hard to leave him, but Natalie had missed the Telegraph office, missed the sense of purpose and connection it gave her. She and Samuel worked out a system where they split the duties, and it worked well enough that Natalie began to seriously consider her dream of expansion. She discussed it with Kieran one evening after Michael had been put to bed. "I have been thinking," she said carefully, "about opening another telegraph office, maybe in Fort Riley or Topeka, somewhere that needs better communication infrastructure." Kieran looked up from the saddle he was mending. "Tell me more." So she laid out her plan, the costs, the logistics, the potential profits. She had been researching and planning for months, saving money carefully. Kieran listened thoughtfully, asking occasional questions, and when she finished he was quiet for a long moment. "You should do it," he said finally. "You have worked hard for this, and you are absolutely capable of running a successful business. I will support you however I can." "You really mean that?" Natalie asked, hardly daring to believe it. Many men would not want their wives working at all, let alone running a business. "Of course I mean it," Kieran said, setting aside his work and pulling her into his lap. "You are brilliant and capable. Why would I want to hold you back from achieving your dreams?" They kissed, and Natalie felt a surge of gratitude for this man who saw her as an equal partner, who encouraged her ambitions rather than trying to diminish them. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "So very much." "I love you too," he replied. "Now and always." Over the next year, Natalie threw herself into her expansion plans. She opened a second telegraph office in Junction City, a growing town that served as a major stop on the railroad. It was a risk, a significant financial investment, but it paid off. The new office was profitable within 3 months, and Natalie hired a competent operator to run it full-time. Meanwhile, Kieran had been promoted to head deputy marshal for the region, which came with more responsibility but also more respect and a better salary. Between their two incomes, they were able to afford a larger house in a better part of town, with a real yard where Michael could play. Life was good. Not perfect, there were still difficulties and disagreements, times when money was tight or the baby was sick, or the demands of their work threatened to overwhelm them. But they faced everything together, united in their love and commitment to each other and their family. Michael grew from a baby into a rambunctious toddler with his father's dark eyes and his mother's determined spirit. He loved playing with toy horses and following his father around whenever Kieran was home. Natalie would watch them together, her tough lawman husband patiently answering a 3-year-old's endless questions, and feel her heart swell with contentment. In the spring of 1882, Natalie discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news came with less fear and more simple joy. They knew what to expect now, felt more prepared. Michael was excited about becoming a big brother, though he did not fully understand what that meant. Their daughter was born in December, just before Christmas. The birth was easier than Michael's had been, and baby Alina came into the world with a lusty cry and a head full of auburn hair that matched neither parent but reminded Kieran of his mother, a grandmother Alina would never meet. Christmas that year was magical. Michael was old enough to be excited about the holiday, and though baby Alina was too young to understand, the joy in their small home was palpable. Kieran had carved wooden toys for Michael, and Natalie had sewn a beautiful christening gown for Alina. They attended Christmas service as a family, and Natalie held her daughter close and felt blessed beyond measure. The years that followed were full and busy. Natalie eventually opened a third telegraph office, this one in Abilene, cementing her reputation as a savvy businesswoman. She hired trustworthy operators and visited each office monthly to ensure everything was running smoothly. It was demanding work, balancing motherhood with business ownership, but she thrived on the challenge. Kieran's career also flourished. He was offered the position of U.S. Marshal for the district in 1885, a prestigious appointment that recognized his years of dedicated service. He hesitated before accepting, worried about the increased danger and time commitment, but Natalie encouraged him. "You were meant for this," she told him. "You are a good man doing important work. Our children should see their father standing up for justice and protecting the innocent. What better example could they have?" So he accepted, and threw himself into the role with characteristic dedication. He was often away from home, traveling to various towns in his jurisdiction, but he always returned with stories and small gifts for the children. And when he was home, he was fully present, devoted to his family in a way that made Natalie fall in love with him anew every day. Michael started school and proved to be a bright student, particularly good at mathematics. Alina was more artistic, always drawing or singing. They were good children, mostly well-behaved, though they had their moments of sibling rivalry and childish rebellion. Natalie and Kieran worked together to raise them with strong values, teaching them honesty and kindness and the importance of hard work. One evening in the summer of 1887, after the children were asleep, Natalie and Kieran sat on their porch watching the fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. They were both in their 30s now, marked by years of hard work and life's challenges, but still deeply in love. "Do you ever think about that day?" Kieran asked quietly. "The day we met?" "Often," Natalie admitted. "It was the worst and best day of my life. Worst because of the fear and danger, best because it brought you to me." "I think about it too," Kieran said. He took her hand, his thumb tracing over her knuckles in a gesture that had become familiar over the years. "I think about how easily things could have gone differently. If I had been a few minutes later, if those men had been more violent, if any number of small details had changed. It terrifies me sometimes, how close I came to never knowing you." "But you were not late," Natalie said firmly. "You were exactly where you needed to be when you needed to be there. And everything that has happened since, our marriage, our children, our life together, it all stems from that moment. We were meant to find each other, Kieran. I truly believe that." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. "You told me once that I connected straight to your heart," he said. "Like a telegraph wire. I have thought about that so many times over the years. It is true, you know. From the moment I saw you in that office, terrified but brave, refusing to betray your principles even in the face of danger, something connected. A direct line from my soul to yours." Natalie lifted her head to look at him, seeing the emotion shining in his eyes. "The connection has only grown stronger," she whispered. "Every day, every year, we are more intertwined. You are part of me now, Kieran. You and the children. You are my heart." They kissed under the stars, a kiss that held years of love and commitment, of trials overcome and joys shared. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. "Let me send you a message," Natalie said playfully. She took his hand and began tapping out Morse code on his palm, a skill she had taught him years ago. The message was simple: "I love you." Kieran laughed and tapped back, "Forever." And Natalie knew it was true. Whatever challenges life brought them, whatever difficulties they faced, they would face them together. Their connection was unbreakable. A telegraph line running straight from heart to heart, carrying messages of love across the distance between two souls that had found their perfect match. As they sat together on the porch, the sounds of their sleeping children drifting through the open window, the vast Kansas sky stretching overhead, Natalie reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that terrifying afternoon in the telegraph office to this moment of perfect peace, it had been a wild ride. But she would not change a single moment, because every experience, good and bad, had shaped them into who they were. The years continued to roll by, marked by the steady rhythms of family life and work. Michael grew into a young man who resembled his father more with each passing year, though he had his mother's quick mind and business sense. He surprised them both by expressing interest in becoming a lawyer, wanting to fight for justice through the courts rather than through law enforcement. Leaner developed into a talented young woman with a beautiful singing voice and a gift for drawing. She was gentler than her brother, more sensitive, but she had a core of steel that reminded Kieran of Natalie on that long-ago day, when she refused to give up her principles even facing down 3 armed men. In 1895, Natalie's telegraph business had expanded to 7 offices across Kansas and into Missouri. She employed over 20 people and had earned a reputation as one of the most successful businesswomen in the region. It was a source of pride, but more than that, it was a legacy she was building for her children, proof that with hard work and determination, anything was possible. Kieran, now in his late 40s, had become something of a legend in law enforcement circles. He had cleaned up some of the worst criminal elements in the territory, always with fairness and integrity. Young lawmen sought him out for advice and training. He could have run for political office easily, but he had no interest in politics, preferring the straightforward work of keeping people safe. They talked sometimes about retiring, about maybe moving back to Texas, where Kieran still owned a share of his family's ranch, but neither was quite ready to give up the life they had built in Leavenworth. This town had been home for so long, had seen them through so many important moments. Their roots ran deep here. Michael went off to law school in St. Louis in the fall of 1896, and the house felt strangely empty without him. But he came home often, full of stories about his studies and the exciting things happening in the big city. He had met a young woman, he told them shyly on one visit home, a professor's daughter named Sarah who was smart and kind. Natalie and Kieran exchanged knowing glances, recognizing the signs of first love. Eleanor, now a teenager, had begun courting a young man who worked at the bank, a quiet fellow named David who treated her with respect and genuine affection. Kieran had given him the stern father talk, making it clear that Eleanor was precious, and any young man who wanted to court her had better have honorable intentions. David had passed the test, and even Kieran had to admit he was a good match for their daughter. One summer evening in 1898, 20 years after that fateful day in the Telegraph office, Natalie and Kieran returned to the spot where it had all begun. The Telegraph office had moved to a larger building years ago, and the old office was now a dry goods store, but they stood outside it anyway, remembering. 20 years, Natalie marveled. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. We have built a good life, Kieran said, his arm around her waist. Better than I ever dreamed possible. Do you have any regrets? Natalie asked. Kieran was quiet for a moment, considering. Not a single one, he said finally. Except maybe that I did not meet you sooner. But everything happened exactly as it was meant to. They walked through the town together as the sun set, pointing out places that held memories. The church where they married, the restaurant where Kieran proposed, the boarding house where Natalie had lived when they first met, now painted a different color but otherwise unchanged. Leavenworth had grown and changed over the years, but the bones of it remained the same. When they returned home, they found a telegram waiting, delivered by one of Natalie's own operators. It was from Michael, announcing that he had graduated top of his class and had been offered a position at a prestigious law firm. And the telegram concluded he and Sarah were engaged. Kieran and Natalie read the message together and then looked at each other with matching expressions of joy tinged with bittersweetness. Their baby boy, grown and starting his own life and family. It was exactly what they had raised him for, but it was still hard to let go. We did good, Natalie said softly. We did, Kieran agreed. He pulled her close, and they stood together in their front hall, the telegram still clutched in Natalie's hand, taking comfort in each other's presence. Eleanor married David in the spring of 1900 in a lovely ceremony that left Natalie crying happy tears. Michael returned from St. Louis with Sarah, now his wife, and it was wonderful to have the whole family together again. The young couple was expecting their first child, making Natalie and Kieran grandparents-to-be. As the new century dawned, bringing with it changes and modernization that would have been unimaginable in the wild frontier days of their youth, Natalie and Kieran found themselves entering a new phase of life. Kieran finally retired from law enforcement in 1902, having served with distinction for over 30 years. There was a big ceremony honoring his service, with speeches and accolades, but Kieran seemed most happy about the prospect of spending his days at home with Natalie. Natalie sold her telegraph business in 1903 for a handsome profit. The world was changing, telephones were becoming more common, and she knew it was time to pass the torch to the next generation. But she felt good about what she had built, about the lives she had improved through better communication networks, about the women she had employed and mentored over the years. Their first grandchild, Michael's son Patrick, was born in 1901, followed by Alina's daughter Grace in 1902, and then Michael's daughter Rose in 1904. Natalie and Kieran threw themselves into grandparenting with the same dedication they had brought to everything else. They loved spoiling the grandchildren, telling them stories, teaching them skills, watching them grow. One evening in the summer of 1905, Natalie and Kieran sat on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. They were both in their 60s now, their hair silver, their faces lined, but their love for each other had not diminished one bit. If anything, it had deepened and matured, tempered by decades of partnership and shared experience. "Do you remember what I said to you that night at the church social?" Natalie asked. "About you connecting straight to my heart." "Of course," Kieran said. "I could never forget that." "It is still true," Natalie said. "After all these years, through everything we have been through, you are still connected straight to my heart." The line has never faltered, not once. Kieran took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "You are my heart, Natalie. You always have been. From the moment I walked into that telegraph office and saw you standing there so brave and frightened all at once. Everything good in my life stems from that moment." "We were lucky," Natalie said. "So incredibly lucky to find each other." "Lucky and blessed," Kieran agreed. He leaned over and kissed her temple, a gesture of such tenderness that it brought tears to Natalie's eyes. "I would do it all again, every single moment, just to end up here with you." They sat together as the stars came out, holding hands and remembering. The Wild West days were behind them now, softened by time and progress into something almost mythical. The dangers and hardships were fading memories, leaving behind only the essential truth of two souls who had found each other against all odds and built a life together. Their children visited often, bringing the grandchildren. The house was frequently full of noise and laughter, of small children running through the rooms and young parents trying to maintain order. Natalie loved it, loved being surrounded by the family she and Kieran had created, this legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone. In the autumn of 1910, Leavenworth held a celebration honoring the town's early pioneers and founders. Both Natalie and Kieran were asked to speak about their experiences in the early days. They stood together before a crowd of hundreds, many of whom had only known the town in its modern incarnation and could barely imagine the rough frontier settlement it had once been. Kieran spoke about his work as a lawman, about the challenges of bringing order to the chaos of the frontier, about the importance of justice and integrity. Natalie spoke about the telegraph business, about how communication had transformed the West, connecting isolated communities and enabling commerce and growth. But what people remembered most from their speeches was when they spoke about each other. Kieran told the story of walking into the telegraph office and finding Natalie facing down 3 armed thieves, of how her courage and principles had impressed him from that very first moment. Natalie talked about how Kieran had risked his life to protect her, how his steadiness and strength had been her anchor through everything that followed. "This town," Natalie said in conclusion, "this wonderful community we all call home is built on stories like ours. Stories of ordinary people doing their best in extraordinary circumstances. Stories of courage and love and determination. The Wild West was wild, yes, but it was also full of hope and possibility. And I am grateful every day that my story led me here, to this place, and to this man who has been my partner and my love for over 30 years. The crowd erupted in applause, and Natalie and Kieran left the stage hand in hand, smiling at each other with the ease of long intimacy. They had done their duty, had shared their history, but now they were ready to go home to their quiet house and their peaceful routine. The years continued to pass, each one a gift. They celebrated golden wedding anniversaries and birthdays, watched their grandchildren grow, and their children become middle-aged. Kieran's health began to decline in his early 70s, his joints aching from years of hard use, his lungs weakened from decades of breathing trail dust. But he remained cheerful, insisting that every day he got to wake up next to Natalie was a good day. Natalie too faced the challenges of aging, her fingers growing stiff with arthritis, her eyesight not as sharp as it once was. But she adapted, finding new ways to stay active and engaged. She taught Grace, now a teenager, Morse code, passing on the skill that had defined so much of her life. The girl took to it naturally, and Natalie felt a deep satisfaction in seeing this piece of history preserved. On a warm September day in 1918, 40 years after they first met, Kieran and Natalie hosted a family gathering at their home. All their children and grandchildren came, along with several great-grandchildren now, tiny babies who represented the newest branch of the family tree. The house was bursting with people and love and noise. After everyone had eaten and the children were playing in the yard, Kieran stood and raised his glass. "I want to propose a toast," he said, his voice not as strong as it once was but still clear. "To my beautiful wife Natalie, who has been my partner in everything for 4 decades. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, and I thank God every day for bringing you into my life." Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "And I want to toast my husband Kieran," she said, standing beside him and taking his hand. "The man who saved my life and then gave me a life worth living. You connected straight to my heart 40 years ago, and you have stayed there ever since." Everyone raised their glasses, many eyes damp with emotion. Then the grandchildren demanded a story, and Kieran obliged, telling once again about the 3 thieves and the brave telegraph operator and the lawman who walked in at just the right moment. The older grandchildren had heard the story before, but they never tired of it, and the younger ones listened with wide eyes. As the evening wound down and family members began to leave, saying long goodbyes and promising to visit again soon, Natalie felt a deep contentment. This was what it was all for, she thought. All the hard work and challenges, all the sacrifices and struggles, they had led to this. A family full of love, a legacy that would continue for generations. That night, alone again in their quiet house, Kieran and Natalie prepared for bed with the familiar routine of long marriage. They moved slowly now, their bodies not as cooperative as they once were, but they helped each other patiently. When they finally lay down together, Kieran pulled Natalie close, her head resting on his shoulder as it had for so many thousands of nights. "I love you," he whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Forever and always." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, 2 hearts beating in tandem, connected by a bond that had only grown stronger with time. Kieran passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, in the spring of 1920. He was 71 years old and had lived a full, rich life. Natalie was devastated by the loss, felt like a part of her soul had been torn away. But she was comforted by her family, by the incredible legacy they had built together, by the knowledge that they had made the most of every day they were given. She lived another 8 years, surrounded by the love of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She remained sharp and engaged until the very end, still teaching Morse code to anyone who would learn, still telling stories about the old days, still speaking about Kieran with a love that time and death could not diminish. On a golden September afternoon in 1928, exactly 50 years after that fateful day in the Telegraph office, Natalie Crawford Irons passed away at the age of 72. She died in her sleep, peacefully, with her children by her side. Her last words, whispered to Michael as he held her hand, were about Kieran. "Tell him I am coming. Tell him the connection was never broken." At her funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives she had touched. Michael gave the eulogy, speaking about his mother's courage and business acumen, her kindness and strength. But mostly he spoke about her love for his father, a love that had defined both their lives and had rippled out to touch everyone around them. "My parents' story," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was a love story for the ages. From the moment they met in violence and danger, they chose love. They chose partnership and commitment. They built a life together that was rich not in material wealth, though they did well enough, but in the things that truly matter: family, integrity, devotion. They showed all of us what it means to truly love someone, to stand by them through everything life throws at you. And though they are both gone now, their love remains, living on in all of us who are here because of them." Natalie was buried next to Kieran in the Leavenworth Cemetery, under a shared headstone that bore both their names and a simple inscription: "Connected heart to heart, now and forever." Their story became part of the town's history, told and retold over the years, sometimes embellished, sometimes simplified, but always recognized as something special. The old Telegraph office building, long since converted to other uses, eventually got a historical marker commemorating the day in 1878 when 3 thieves burst in, and an unarmed deputy marshal faced them down to protect the brave telegraph operator who would become his wife. Their descendants flourished, spreading across the country, carrying forward the values Natalie and Kieran had instilled: courage, integrity, love, commitment. The family stayed close, gathering regularly, keeping the stories alive, making sure each new generation knew where they came from and what they came from. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the Kansas plains and the stars came out in their millions, you could almost imagine 2 souls still sitting on a porch somewhere, hands clasped, connected heart to heart by a love that transcended time and space, as enduring and faithful as the telegraph wires that once spanned the wild frontier, carrying messages of hope and connection to lonely outposts on the edge of civilization. Their story was complete, a full circle from that afternoon of danger and destiny to a lifetime of love and partnership, from 2 strangers brought together by circumstance to soulmates united for eternity. It was a story of the Wild West, yes, with its danger and excitement and frontier justice. But more than that, it was a love story, pure and simple, proof that even in the roughest times and places, love can flourish and grow and create something beautiful that lasts far beyond a single lifetime. Natalie and Kieran's legacy was not just in the children they raised or the work they did or the businesses they built. It was in the example they set of what true partnership looks like, of how 2 people can face life's challenges together and emerge stronger. It was in the way they loved each other, fully and completely, from that first dangerous encounter to their final peaceful moments decades later. The telegraph lines that had defined so much of Natalie's professional life eventually became obsolete, replaced by newer technology. But the connection she spoke of that night under the stars, the telegraph wire running straight from heart to heart, that was eternal. It was a connection that could not be broken by distance or time or even death. A bond forged in danger and strengthened by years of daily choosing each other, again and again. And so their story ends where all the best love stories end, with a love that conquered all obstacles, that grew deeper with time, that left behind a legacy of family and memory and inspiration. Natalie and Kieran Irons, the telegraph operator and the cowboy who saved her, had found in each other something rare and precious, and they had held on to it with both hands for the rest of their lives. Their connection remained unbroken, a testament to the power of love to transform lives and create meaning in a sometimes chaotic world. From that September afternoon in 1878, when a cowboy walked into a telegraph office and changed two lives forever, to their final resting place side by side in the Kansas earth they had called home, theirs was a story of true love, the kind that happens once in a lifetime if you are lucky, the kind that makes everything else worthwhile. The Wild West faded into history, but stories like theirs endured, reminding future generations that courage and love and integrity never go out of style, that the best things in life are worth fighting for, and that sometimes, in the most unexpected moments, you can find the person who connects straight to your heart and changes everything.